that it was delight to the eyes. Isn't that the lust of the eyes? Now, we're going to make a point here we'll come back to later. Jesus said, whoever looks on a woman to lust after her, the lust of the eyes, has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Temptation is not sin. Temptation is not sin. All right? You got that straight? Just because we got tempted to do something and we didn't do it doesn't mean we sin. Temptation is not sin. So on our road trip, let's take another part of our happy little map over to the book of James. Hebrews, James, Peter. By the way, now I know Janice has, maybe she's the source of this, I'm not sure. But a big joke with Pastor Mark is, let me get in James here. Eileen says I can't do two things at once, and I can't. Okay, I got it. Road trips. Pastor Mark and I were coming back. It's been 25 years ago now. We're coming back from being out in Wyoming, hunting deer and antelope. We're traveling across Interstate 70, I think it is, where you go past Chicago and everything. And we're on our way home, making good time. And you have to remember, for me, the point is to get from point A to point B. I'm not about whatever anything else there is in between. And Mark says, hey, there's this great gun shop, archery place, fishing place a little north of us before we get to Chicago. Why don't we take a little trip up there? And I said, so how far is it up there? He says, oh, it's not very far, it's just an inch on the map. So that has become a perennial joke from that day to this with everyone that knows Pastor Mark. Because you'll be going to wherever, St. Louis, Missouri, and you could wind up in Bismarck, North Dakota, because it's only 3 inches on the map. So, anyway, in this particular road trip here, I don't know what kind of application. I had to give you something from a road trip, just so you can do it. Okay, so temptation is not sin. James chapter 1, verse 13. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. Okay, so let's stop right there before we go any farther. Let's go farther first, and then we'll explain it. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Now pay attention here. Pay attention to this whole thing. Temptation, lust, sin, death. It's a sequence. Temptation, lust, sin, death. Just because we're tempted, we don't jump straight to sin. There's lust in between. Now, lust is a perfectly good biblical word. It just means desire. But it's like a continuum. When you get way over on the far side of it, you've gone too far over to letting your lust carry you away. And so we see something with our eyes, we're tempted, whatever. Somebody asked Billy Graham about that once upon a time. Now, how do you work with that verse of man looks on a woman to lust after? And something about sin is like a bird that flies in your hair. And Billy Graham said, you just can't let it build a nest there. That's the point. You see something and you go, oh boy. Now, like me, if I look too long at a picture or the real thing. Last time I went up to Hudson Chapel, Don Sitz over in Cuyahoga Falls, Don Sitz Pontiac. He had his prize car there, which is a blue 64 GTO with a 389 and three deuces, that we used to call them, 3 2-barrels, and a 4-speed. And I remember standing in that car, putting my hand on it. Oh! I got to walk away from this car. Just walk away. I'll never own one. I'll never have one. And so I just enjoy that somebody else gets to have it if you can. But if you let that take you too far, when lust is conceived, and it goes too far, then you wind up into sin. So you get temptation, lust, sin, and death. That's the way the sequence goes. So temptation is not sin. So that brings us to our road trip here, Hebrews 4:15, which is a key passage for us in terms of the temptation of Christ. Temptation, Hebrews 4:15. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Now, this is the point I made when we were talking with Ruby. All things, what does that mean? It means all categories. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. It's a big category. I mean, there could be millions of sin in each one of the categories. What it means here is that Jesus was tempted in some way in every one of the categories. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Years ago, we had, so while we're thinking of that, we'll stick right there at Hebrews 4:15 for a second. Jesus was able to control his flesh. Got that? He was able to control his flesh and not be enticed to sin. That's the point. He was a perfect man. Perfect man without sin. And Scripture guards this truth very emphatically. Road trip that's not on here, Romans 8:3. 1 inch on the map. Romans. You have to write it down. We have to go there. So you can look at it in Scripture on your own. Romans 8:3. For what the law could not do, weak as it was through the flesh. What could the law not do? Couldn't make anyone righteous. Couldn't keep anyone from resisting the temptation of the flesh. God did, sending his own Son, watch this, in the likeness of sinful flesh. The Scripture guards very carefully the sinlessness of Jesus. He wasn't sinful flesh. When he died on the cross, he became sin for us. He was never a sinner. Big difference between becoming sin and being a sinner. He was never a sinner. He was in the likeness of sinful flesh, and as an offering for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh. So he was tempted in the three big areas. Doesn't mean that he was tempted in every individual sin that might happen to fall into those three critical areas. I know this person who was in our church a long time ago, grew up in our church, and very good-looking guy. And as he's way through college and working, at some point along the way, I don't remember all the details, I just remember there was this really good-looking woman where he worked who was a divorcee, and somehow she invited him over to her house. And so he went over, and the minute I heard the story, I thought, no, you should not have gone. It's like an ox to the slaughter, Solomon said. And so anyway, when they got over to her house, she said she'd be back in a second, and she went down the hall and came back naked and wanted him to have sex with her, which he resisted. Good job. And got out of there. So I doubt that Jesus ever had a naked woman come onto him. I don't know, because it's not in Scripture. But he didn't have to have every single individual temptation happen to him to be tempted in all areas. He was tempted in all three areas somehow, some way, with temptation. And so we want to continue on our road trip here. Matthew chapter 4.
Wasn't he tempted in all areas when the devil tempted him those 3 times?
That's where we're going on our road trip. Our happy road trip is going to get us right there. to Matthew chapter 4. So you're miles ahead. You've already taken the inch on the map. Matthew chapter 4. So, Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Remember James? God does not tempt anyone. He subcontracts it to the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Then the devil took him into the holy city, and he had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will give his angels charge concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, On the other hand it is written, You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, All these things will I give you if you fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, Begone, Satan, for it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him. And behold, angels came and began to minister to him. So, in Jesus' temptation here, identify the categories. Lust of the eyes, pride of life, lust of the flesh. Which was which here?
Well, lust of the eyes was the bread. Lust of the eyes was the bread. Lust of the flesh would be the cast yourself down, and pride of life would be the worship fee.
Keep working on it. Close. You got to ponder this for a second. Lust of the eyes, pride of life.
Well, when we looked down and said, I'll give you all this kingdom, that's the pride of life. But when we needed something a little bigger and a little better.
Okay. And the most interesting thing in this passage, I think, is that Satan had the power to do it. I think that's the most interesting part. I've told people for years, Satan can make you do well in your job. Satan can give you money. That's what Satan's done in America now for decades. He's made everyone do well. Satan can do that. That's easy for him to do. So it's all in his power. It's all under his authority. So anyway, so you think that the temptation to worship Satan or to have all the kingdoms of the earth, that is the pride of life. I think it's good. These are, in a little way, you can make a couple of them go into different categories if you want to. Now, the bread seems to me to be lust of the flesh because, remember, lust is a good word, and everyone needs bread. But one of the biggest problems within Roman culture was, they would have these big banquets, and everybody would eat all the great food until they were so full, and then they'd go outside and throw up, and then come back in and eat some more. And God says to the Apostle Paul, your God is your belly. So in the lust of the flesh, we have what could be a normal thing, bread, or pie or cake, or Oreos, or ice cream for me, chocolate chips, whatever. But, remember, lust of the flesh has to do with something that our flesh enjoys. Now, it could go beyond that with other stuff. But you see that all three categories are here. Lust of the eyes, pride of life, lust of the flesh. And Jesus, in this particular temptation with Satan, resisted in each category. So the big point we're making is that when Jesus was tempted in all things, he didn't have to have every individual sin that Satan could come along. He didn't have to have a naked woman to be tempted in the lust of the flesh.